Everyone, please put your hands together for the wonderful Zak Wood. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm going to speak today, and I find it always difficult to follow two very, very good technical presentations, but on something a little less technical. I'm going to talk about a program we've been running in South Africa for the last 10 years, which is really about, it is about collaboration on a sector-wide level and a broad level in a difficult environment. But before I do that, one of the hardest things about presenting in this way, of course, is that you're speaking into a little bit of a black box. So it's great. At the moment, I can see the other panelists on my screen, but I can't see any of the audience or anything. And so what I'm going to do is pop my phone number up there, and I'm going to give you all a task, which is you can say anything you like to try and make me laugh during this presentation. Feel free, get stuck in, and let's see how it goes. So it'll also just connect me to the world. Before I start, I want you just to take, please, a minute or two to reflect a little bit on this question. What society would I want to live in if the vagaries of my birth were not a factor? If you were going to be born tomorrow for the first time, well, it doesn't matter for the first time, who cares? But if you were going to be born tomorrow, roll of the dice, you're going to be born wherever you are. You could be born a man, a woman, a different gender. You could be born into a rich country, a poor country, a rich family, a poor family. You could be born of any race, as I say, of any gender, with any orientations. What world would you want to be born into? So not what do you want that dice to land on, but what world makes sense for you in terms of the kind of world you'd like to be born into? Because I think it would be hard to say it's the world we're in right now, unless you feel that you are one of the luckiest people on earth. I think many of us on this call were probably born into quite a lucky space. But that's not true of everybody. And so this is a really interesting question to me, is what would the common good look like so that regardless of birth or heritage, you could live a full and fair life? And that seems quite vague, it seems quite broad, but it's a really good question to get to our first point, which is around about the superordinate good. Something we've worked on in Courageous Conversations for many years is trying to define what our superordinate good is. And what we mean by that is, what is the thing that is so clearly a good or a right or a direction that we can all move in, all right, that it makes sense for everybody. And that's not trivial. Mining companies, even just across mining companies, have very different ideas of what the world should look like and where they should go, whether we should be exploiting as much as possible, whether we should be doing so in a very gentle and collaborative way. All of these are different. And so I asked this question to leaders in 2020 in South African mining and got a number of answers, which was great. Now, when I say leaders, let's be clear. I asked this to a group of mining chief executives, to the heads of labor unions, to the heads of NGOs in South Africa, anti-mining NGOs, by the way, to a group of faith leaders, church leaders, effectively really busy people. I asked them this exact question as I've asked you, and I said to them, think about this and give us some answers. There were some follow-on questions, but this left-hand side were, sorry, my mouse on the wrong one. This left-hand side was their answers specifically to that specific question. They gave a lot of thought and a lot of really good answers, but ultimately they boiled down to a handful of things. Equal opportunity to start. Not everybody has to have equal opportunities by the time they're 20, but to be born into equal opportunities, to not be judged on your choices or life path, to be born into a just world, and finally, to have a reasonable expectation of a reasonable equity for life, so to not feel that you were constantly walking on a tightrope, that one slip meant you would never recover. And so that was really interesting. And I think, what I've shown you here is two different ways of defining a common goal or a common superordinate. First, I gave you my phone number and I told you to do something, which nobody has. Second, I gave you a provocation and I said, well, think about this a little bit. Okay. Now, I haven't given you a line to do that. I'm sure that you will. I'm sure many of you are thinking about that already. But you can see that a provocation works much better. And there is a third way, of course, which is a crisis. And in South Africa in 2012, in August of 2012, South Africa and South African mining faced one of its biggest post-apartheid crises. In fact, it may still be the biggest post-apartheid crisis we've faced. A protracted strike in the platinum sector resulted in a number of protests. And during a protest on the 16th of August, police opened fire on striking workers and they killed 34 miners. Right. There had been a couple of deaths in the build-up to that. I think the total, if I remember correctly, was 38. But these were people who had journeyed from all corners of our country. They'd come far from their homes and families. They were trying to earn a living to support themselves, their families, their loved ones. And this event occurred. And it sent shockwaves through the country. I remember watching the news the day that it happened. I was in Chile. And it was on the news in Chile. I saw it in my hotel room. And it really changed the way the country thought. And the one thing it did was that all of the mining sector went, that could have been us. And I remember speaking to one of the other platinum, this happened on a Lonmin mine, but I spoke to the chief exec from one of the other platinum miners about 6 months later, and he said, could have been any one of us. He said, Lonmin really got unlucky, but that could have happened to any of us. The point is, what it did was it gave it brought this to a head that actually we really need to rethink what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I think that there's a few things that are happening at the moment that certainly in the mining sector are coming to a head where we really need to be rethinking how we're doing things, changing world order, illicit mining, and I'm not saying illegal, but illicit mining and mineral flows, the mining legacy and extractives linked conflict. I think, what we're seeing in the DRC at the moment is poor, but we've seen this all over the world and regular things. And I think that these are areas or convening points that are important to us. All conflict begins with a failure of communication. This was Cardinal Stephen Brislin said this a couple of years ago at one of our courageous conversations. And I think it may be one of the wisest statements that I've heard. Cardinal Brislin is a deeply thoughtful and deeply wise man. And this was key. We start with a failure of communication. And so what we need is a convener. So we've spoken about how to get everybody or why, or how to get everybody looking in the same direction. Okay, but who's the convener? Who's the person to get everybody looking in the same direction? And so again, in South Africa, we've run courageous conversations since 2015. This is just a smattering of photos, but it's led by the Archbishop of Cape Town, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, hand in glove these days with Cardinal Brislin. They both co-convene it. And when we began in 2015, the very first question that Archbishop Thabo asked, he said to one of the chief execs, he said, would you want your children to be miners working underground? And the answer was, well, mining's given me so much, etc. And he said, no. That wasn't the question. The question was, would you want your kids to go underground to be working at the face? Now, that's complex. And the objective of that wasn't to try and embarrass the chief exec or say your mines are in a bad state. The objective was to say, let's initiate a shift towards empathy. Let's begin with a shift to understanding what the other person is. Because until we do that, we can't even start to collaborate. And so out of that space, we then created this Courageous Conversations platform, this unique, non-partisan space for conversation and engagement towards a common good. Now, I'm certainly not saying Courageous Conversations is the answer for every problem on earth, but the ability to convene around a non-aligned person, okay, in this case, the Archbishop, is crucial. The ability to define a common objective, a common superordinate goal that everybody has to agree is worthwhile, is crucial. And then what that does, and you can see that we've had a broad number of people involved. I mean, so we've had governments involved, churches, NGOs, and we get NGOs that are really anti-mining. I mean, anybody who's worked with earthworks or benchmarks will know these are not guys who are coming out going, mining's great and we should keep going. All right. Trade unions, a lot of the mining companies in South Africa, and a lot of non-miners, very importantly. So a big, broad collection of people, all with this common goal. And then what we do is we say, well, the foundation of any accomplishment here is going to be around relationship. So how do we build that relationship? And that's really what we're doing towards any kind of collaboration or any collective work. And that relationship then must be based on trust and honesty. And we always define trust, and I think it's a good definition of trust is something that you gift. You have to begin from a perspective of saying, I will believe in you, I will trust you. And then you have to be honest enough to continue that trust. Because the moment that somebody breaks that trust, then you can't rebuild it. And so that has been our objective and our drive with Courageous Conversations, is building this trust between, or gifting and then maintaining this trust between trade unions, between mining companies. And you will see in South Africa, certainly the trade relationship has been significantly changed. I'm not saying entirely by this, but I think partially because of this. The relationship with communities has improved. It's not perfect. We still have many problems, but we're moving in that way. And so we have this envisioned future. And again, so the point here is to get everybody walking in the same direction. Sorry, I'm conscious of my time there, Sarah, so I'm going to move a little bit. What we did was we developed this pathway and we said, okay, well, we begin with adversarial posturing. We're committed to positions, not values. That's how everybody comes in. I believe this, I believe that. And then we commit to dialogue. And slowly we move towards this transformation, all right, this transformation space. And we can do that around a number of themes, which is what we've done in South Africa. These themes change every couple of years because it's not a static environment. We continually update and discuss and move and shift. And then out of that, companies and NGOs and different organizations, people have gone off and created their own projects. I help on many of these and just guide and structure, but ultimately these are all run locally and developed. And that's happened all around the country. Anybody who knows South African mining will know that this touches pretty much all of the major points of South Africa, all the major mining areas of South Africa. And some of these have been very complex. Richards Bay, we got involved after the GM of the mine was assassinated on his way to work back in 2021, I think it was, or 22. And so we've worked very closely with church leaders, with other organizations in Richards Bay on how do we try to establish peace in that area. In Limpopo, we ran a program with local churches who created this incredible dialogue, and I'll show you some of the results from that in Limpopo, where over the course of 3 years, they managed to improve academic pass rates from 35% to 68%. They dropped teenage pregnancy in that region from 26%, which is just a number that blows my mind, that a quarter of teenagers in that region were ending up pregnant, to 7%, and even less these days. Gender-based violence plummeted, absenteeism in schools plummeted, school dropout rates plummeted. All around, we have a superordinate goal. We have an agreement that this is the final destination that we want to. This is our envisioned future. And then we can work towards that in a way that makes sense locally. We can't control that from the center. We don't know enough about the localized needs and requirements. And so that has to happen out there. But we've created, and I'm not saying we as in Courageous Conversations, I'm saying the process must create this superordinate goal. And so to me, the three things most important for these broad collaborative movements that we need more and more and more is to have a safe, trusted convener who is, I always use the term, he is in but not of. He is in the conflict, but he's not of the conflict, because then he's immediately in a position. There must be a superordinate goal which retains empathy for the different contexts that people are coming in from. And then finally, there must be a pathway to practical implementation, or to a practical space that is without prescription. So when we all have a superordinate goal and we know we're all heading that way, go in your own way, go on your own path, follow your own direction. You're coming from different angles, but moving towards that ultimate envisioned future. And so I think that's been our journey on Courageous Conversations. As I say, over the last 10 years, it hasn't been a perfect journey. There have been lots and lots of missteps and guides, but it's been complex, and I think that the South African mining industry today is a very different beast to what it was 10 years ago, much for the positive, and even in an industry that's really struggling to survive. And finally, this is just a quote that I often share with our Courageous Conversations participants. It's really about South Africa, but I think it rings true for most places in the world, is that we're in such a frustrating and fractured space at the moment, but it is possible for two or more realities to coexist and to orbit each other, and that wounds can only heal properly when we make the effort to recognize and to acknowledge, whether through a convener or however we do it, or with a superordinate goal, find our way together. I think that has to be one of our superordinate goals as the mining sector, is finding what are the ultimate truths that we can all begin to move towards in a positive manner and for the common good. Thanks, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much for that, Zak. Round of applause, everybody, for the amazing Zak Wood. Now, Zak, I know that people, I'm sure, are messaging you now on the phone number that you provided earlier on. I messaged you and you did giggle a little bit at the beginning, but maybe you discounted that. Just one question for you, Zak, and I know that there are others coming in the chat and online, etc. In terms of the whole, almost the courage to let people find their own paths and have respect for them to then go and create those programs and that practical aspect. That's quite brave, especially when you're trying to prove to somebody, or someone says, how are you measuring this for success? Kind of, is there a little bit of tension in that, especially when you were first getting it going? And how did you get people to trust you enough, or the kind of the broader process enough to be able to do it?
Good, great question. That tension always exists. And I think it's important that that tension exists, because I think it's partly how we hold each other to account. If we have entered into a relationship that says we believe we want to go in the right direction, then and we all agree what that right ultimate point is, okay, then we can all move towards that. A very, very good example of this actually was safety in mining. I mean, when I first started working in mining in 2006, I so vividly remember working with a company who had something like 75 fatalities that year. And they were like tapping themselves on the back and saying, well, we brought it down from last year. Okay. And then the mining sector in South Africa really got their socks together and they said, hang on a second, we're going to sort out safety. All right. And last year they had fewer fatalities than they've ever had. I think they were down at 42 across the sector, across the country. So, suddenly we had a superordinate good that said, that's the thing we're going to go and, really tuck into. And so from Courageous Conversations, that hasn't always been easy. But you have to have those tensions. You have to have people. If everybody's just holding hands and singing, we don't go anywhere. So there has to be that tension of saying, well, we are going to push each other, but we have sufficient relationship and sufficient mutual respect to say, well, we will hold each other to account. We will allow ourselves to be held to account and therefore move forward. And I see somebody's put in the chat that Thabisile Pumo spoke last year. I mean, Thabisile has really been core in this. She's got such a great understanding of that vision and how to do that. And then the question of how do you find the superordinate good? Well, that's a point around having the right convener who can pull you in. This is where the Archbishop was so great, and why he could start with that, create the empathy. Let's find it. Let's discuss it. It's not easy always. It doesn't always take a day, but slowly move towards that. And again, that can change. It can shift over time. But having that relationship, that's the first step towards accomplishment.
Amazing. Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Zak. Round of applause. Brilliant. Thank you.